Time to talk Texas A&M football here on MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. And I'm sure many of you are saying, yeah, it's about time. We used to talk a lot of Aggies, but it's been difficult for me to find a guest contributor to talk up Texas A&M football. So here we are with Jay Arnold, who played there at Texas A&M in College Station, defensive end in 2013 and 14. You can currently join him on theother98.com. Jay, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing all right, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. I appreciate you stopping by because, again, we are lacking on the Aggies. So my deal is basically I watch all the games. I watch as much as possible, but like to bring in guys like you to really grind down on the particular teams. So I would say in the typical season, I watch Texas A&M play all the big games, Auburn, LSU, Alabama, those kind of games, and obviously the bowl game as well. But you're going to bring a ton of insight into this situation. So before we get started on 2019, would love to hear your take on your experiences playing football. So this is obviously Kevin Sumlin, Johnny Manziel territory, at least in 12 and 13 with Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans and a lot of great players there at that point. So just kind of take us through your experience.
Yeah, it was wild coming up as a recruit. So I wasn't there for the 2012 season, but then Johnny's not senior year, but his last year at A&M in 2013, I got to watch him play. Seeing somebody that's able to do that kind of stuff on the field, it's not something that happens very often. You got a guy who can take a play that's busted and turn it into a 40-yard gain like it's nothing. The worst part about that was probably practicing against him. As a defensive lineman, you think you got him pinned up, and he's able to escape the pocket, make you look silly in the process.
Very cool. Now, Kevin Sumlin's a guy that had tremendous recruiting success there at Texas A&M, top 5 to 10 classes, would get off to those infamous 5-0 starts and then trail off and lose some games in the SEC West and finish 8-5. And obviously it ultimately led to his ouster. What was your experience with Kevin Sumlin, and what are your thoughts about his possibilities there at Arizona?
Yeah, I really enjoyed my time playing for Coach Sumlin. I thought he was a player's coach. He did delegate most of his responsibilities, so I didn't ever really saw him too much around practice. He's focused mainly on the offensive side of the ball. That was what he kind of got known for at Houston.
Yep.
But as far as the collapses late season, it's tough to really pinpoint what went wrong. There's a combination of factors, guys dealing with injuries. You had just momentum is a huge thing that people outside of college football may not understand. Whenever things start going wrong, it's a snowball effect. And I think A&M under someone kind of had that same issue. And each year, whenever it started happening, it's, oh no, here we go again. And, I loved playing for Coach Sumlin. I thought he was a great coach. But it came time that A&M had to make a decision to move on. And as much as I hated to see him leave, I think the program's in a great direction under Jimbo Fisher right now.
And I think we also have to understand with the wins and losses being kind of balanced or imbalanced early season, late season, and those closes not being what we would expect, the schedule kind of tilts in that way as well. If you're playing in the SEC West in the best division in college football, you're running into a whole lot of Alabama, Mississippi State, Auburn, and LSU in November, and it's not quite like playing Lamar, Sam Houston State, and Rice and some of the teams that you played in September.
No, definitely
different. So, there are collapses. I'm sure we could go back, and I remember watching those games to poor performances, but there were also some just really, really good teams, really, really good games where Texas A&M was losing by a field goal or touchdown. They played really well. It wasn't like they collapsed. They were losing to a top 5 team in the country. So there is that, too. Who was your position coach?
So Terry Price was actually my position coach, a guy who's still on the staff there at A&M now. Played his college ball at A&M, so I was glad to see him stick on whenever Jimbo Fisher came in. He has a lot of experience in the SEC. Before he was at A&M, coached at Auburn and Ole Miss. So he's a guy that I think did a great job of developing defensive linemen while I was there. Obviously, the names that people think of, Myles Garrett's going to be the first guy that comes to mind. Deshaun Hall, who came in my recruiting class, He helped to develop those guys a lot, and I think he's been a huge boost since he got to the program.
We've got Jay Arnold on the line helping us track down Texas A&M football coming off spring practice. You can join Jay at theother98.com. Jay played defensive end for the Aggies from 2013 to 14. Let's talk about spring storylines. So what stands out to you in regards to whatever information you can gather? You were at the spring game. I think the fan bases, we blow up spring games a little bit too much and are like, oh, who played well at the spring game? Well, there were 15 practices before that and scrimmages that were closed that in terms of the hitting and the contact and everything going on to the coaches were just as important. But just your thoughts about what stood out to you about this team's progression toward 2019.
Yeah, so the main thing that I was looking at going into the spring ball, or one of the main things, was who was going to end up replacing Nick Starkel as Kellen Mond's backup at the quarterback position. You know, it was a battle that everybody had their eye on going into the spring. You had the new guy, the new early enrollee, Zach Calzada, coming in. You had Connor Blumrook, who's the only of the three guys that were battling for it that had taken that snap in a game before. And then you had James Foster, who was a recruit out of Alabama, redshirted his freshman year and was looking to improve. And, you know, at the spring game, I didn't expect it, but Zach Calzada came away as a guy that really impressed me. We knew he had a lot of arm talent coming out of high school, but I didn't expect him to be quite as crisp as he was. He looked good moving around the pocket, which was another surprise. And I mean, if I had to put my money on it right now, he would be my second string quarterback going into fall camp, obviously behind Kellen Mond. As for Mond's performance during the spring game, it's tough to gauge too much off of it, just because there was a lot of receivers, a lot of his key targets that actually missed the spring game. Guys like Kendrick Rogers, who you may know for his big performance against LSU. Courtney Davis, another guy who had a pretty big performance in that game. But overall, I thought Kellen Mond looked good. His first pass had me a little bit worried. You know, he goes out there rolling out to his right and just kind of throws one up and gets intercepted on the first throw of the spring game for him. But other than that, I thought he had a pretty solid performance. He'll be expected to take another step forward under Jimbo Fisher, especially. Fisher obviously being known for developing quarterbacks over his college coaching career. But that was the main offensive storyline going into camp, just kind of how they would deal with the loss of Nick Starkel.
It's always my favorite question during the spring and summer, Jay, is because I try to keep track of as much personnel as I possibly can. So I want to be able to track, okay, I can't know the 105-man roster for Texas A&M and every other team in the country, but I want to know those, 4 or 5 players on each side of the ball that are impact players, productive players, and then, who's the next wave of players. So as you look at this team, based on personnel losses to the NFL draft, just based on guys that you think are ready to explode, ready to come on, maybe not be all SEC players, but impact players. Who are some of those guys you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so I mentioned the receivers, some of them being out for the spring game, but I think Kendrick Rogers is a guy who really burst on the scene with that performance against LSU. He had a clutch performance against Clemson earlier in the season as well. He's a big guy, 6'4", 6'5" receiver. He can be a really reliable target for Kellen Mond throwing the ball. And at running back, replacing Travion Williams, obviously not going to be an easy task, a record setter for A&M. But Jayshon Corbin is a really explosive back. We saw bits of him throughout the season, but I think the play that probably sticks out the most to people was his opening kickoff return for a touchdown against Arkansas. Corbin is arguably more of a home run threat than Travion Williams was, but he's still got to learn how to develop the small things in his game that Travion did so well. Travion really underrated as a pass blocker out of the backfield, great pass catcher as well. So we'll see how Corbin adjusts to a bigger role. And there's a couple of big power backs behind Corbin as well. Cordarian Richardson, the Central Florida transfer, is one of the guys that comes to mind. As far as on the defensive side of the ball, talking about the playmakers, I think the guy you got to look at first is Leon O'Neal stepping in at safety now that Donovan Wilson's gone. He had a great performance in that bowl game against NC State. And if he can replicate that kind of performance, it'll be huge for him. And then up front, Justin Matabuke, he's the only returning defensive lineman from last year's unit, which was one of the best rush defenses in the country. And I think Matabuke is going to be the standard bearer for this defensive line. He's a guy that's pretty quick for his size at over 300 pounds. He'll be playing at the 3 technique. I think the nose will end up being Bobby Brown, another guy who has a chance to be good. But Matabuke is the guy I really have circled up front for the defensive line.
When you look at Texas A&M overall, I think it's just intriguing that Jimbo Fisher comes in, and it's not like there was a whole lot of upside there. You know, you got a really good team anyway, and regardless of the record, it's kind of like Auburn last year. They went 3-5 in the SEC. They blast Purdue in a bowl game. That was one of the 15 or 20 best teams in the country. I don't care how many games they lost. They just had that tough of a schedule. And It's the same with Texas A&M. You know, they play a like seed in the ACC, and I usually don't blow one game out of proportion, and I don't even do it with this, but I saw that coming. Texas A&M is going to go and house NC State. There's no comparison between these two teams. So it was a really good program before, but I'm sure A&M fans, and you're going to be able to speak to this much better than me, are just longing for, we want to be elite. We've thought over the last 5 or 6 years we were going to get there, and maybe we did for a year when they won the Cotton Bowl and with Johnny, but it just hasn't happened. Now you pay all this money for a coach that's been there, done it, won the national championship, and they were pretty good last year. They were really good if you really look at the totality of the season and the tough schedule. And even though the Alabama game got away from them, when you look at how Alabama murdered everybody else in the regular season, they played the toughest game against Alabama. They took it to the last, 5-6 minutes of the third quarter, still within a score. They played a really good season, and they were decidedly better under Jimbo Fisher already last season. There has to be some excitement there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think seeing Kellen Mond in year 2 of Jimbo Fisher's system is something that people aren't necessarily thinking about. That first year in a new system can be tough for a quarterback to adjust to. So I think you'll see him take a step forward. Obviously, the fans are over the moon about Jimbo's first year performance. With fans, it's always trying to get them to calm down a little bit, one way or the other. Fans live in extremes. As a player, it was always kind of funny to witness that early in the seasons when we talked about those 5-0 starts. You're all the fans are riding high, and you're kind of realizing that there's some holes in the performances. And then you get into the end of the season, and the fans are worried about what's going on. So it's always funny to address those extremes. But when you talk about year 2 under Jimbo Fisher, you look at it; it's one of the most difficult schedules in the country. I mean, you got Georgia and LSU on the road to close the season. You got Clemson on the road. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. So, yeah, Jimbo Fisher could take a step forward in year 2, but you have to think it's not going to be easy.
Got Jay Arnold on the line. You can join him at theother98.com. Jay played defensive end for Texas A&M from 2013 to 14. A little Johnny Manziel there in 2013. Big win over Duke in the Chick-fil-A Bowl, if I remember correctly. That was quite the shootout.
Yeah, as a defensive player, it's not exactly what you want. But no, I was a true freshman. That was actually my first start. And
oh, wow.
I can't even begin to describe how crazy that game was for me. All the emotions going through that, and then just seeing a guy like Johnny kind of put the team on his back, especially when the defense wasn't doing that much. Sad to say.
You guys were down like 17-24, something like that.
It was, trying to remember.
38-17, something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty wild going into halftime there.
Yeah, beat them like 54-48 or something like that.
52-48, I think, was the final score.
There you go. Yeah, exciting stuff. So what happened leading into that game that propelled you into the starting lineup?
Yeah, so to close the season against Mizzou that year, the starting defensive end had been dealing with foot problems, and he did end up starting that game against Mizzou, but wasn't able to make it through the first quarter. So I ended up playing most of that Missouri game, and then he thought he was going to be able to make it after the time off before the bowl game, but ended up not being able to go against Duke. And so I just kind of got thrown in there.
Interesting stuff. Jay Arnold from Texas A&M. You can catch him on the other98.com. Jay, it was a fun discussion. Anytime you'd like to stop by and talk Aggies, we're here.
That sounds awesome. Mark, thanks again for having me on.